Hello and welcome to Nikon Sessions. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about stories that change the world through photography and video. I'm joined by an incredible group of people, all from slightly different backgrounds and different reasons as to why you're here. So I think let's start with some introductions. Give me an idea about yourself and what you do.
My name is Sanne de Wilde. I'm a visual storyteller working with the medium of photography. Stories that center around genetics, identity, perception, and mythology that I try to metaphorically translate through images.
I'm Sam Sutaria. I run a company called Waterbear. Waterbear is an interactive, impact-led publisher, so we tell stories that try to create impact across the world. It's all about using visual media to create behavior change.
My name's Tianna Williams and I'm a portrait photographer and I specialise in maternity portraits, so pretty much telling their own story into motherhood, their journey of pregnancy and that whole experience, which is just incredible to be able to do that.
My name's Sam Hockley. I'm a filmmaker and a self-shooting director with specialty in news and documentary broadcasting.
Great. So what I really want to dive into first is how do you use photography or video to kind of tell the story or the story that you want to perceive to the public?
We are a passionate group of activists, storytellers, visual storytellers, photographers, and media execs, and really we came together and tried to kind of throw the rule book out the window a little bit. We had a list called the I don't like list, which was basically things that slightly annoyed us about how media worked. We have tried to effectively systems change from the grassroots, so actually how we tell stories. We follow an impact-led approach, which is really, trying to plan exactly the impact you want to see with the content that you're creating from day one. I think a lot of people these days try to retrofit an impact campaign onto a film or a photo series, and actually our core belief is that you have to actually start with impact right at the beginning.
No, I definitely agree with that. I mean, the way I sort of tell stories is just between me and the subject, really, and making impact that way. I kind of see like video and film as a format for me to have a voice, and I've always had that sort of growing up and in my professional career as well. It's been my voice, and I like to lend that to other people and try and channel interesting stories that I think will hopefully make change, but if not, provide some interest and some entertainment along the way.
When you're building that relationship with the subject, how do you go about doing that?
I like to ignore the camera to start with, and just speak directly to the person. I kind of like doing that the whole time, I like that sort of like eye contact the whole time, just nodding along and just getting to grips with like who they are, like from the basis. And
I love that actually, and it's quite a lot like how I work with my clients as well. Most of them have never been in front of a camera, so they're very kind of anxious and thinking, oh, I'm not going to look my best. How's this even going to work? I know that I want someone to capture this important time in my life. So we just start off with a chat too. I invite them to the studio so they get to look around, but we'll sit down and we end up talking about their pregnancy, because I used to be a midwife. And most of my clients know that because they'll go and do their research. But they're very interested in that, but they also feel really safe to share a lot of kind of private and personal things with me, but also why they want to have the session and why it's important to them. And I think that relationship building is really crucial.
Yeah, I think what's really special about the photography as a medium, that it has a certain democracy in it, so it's accessible to a lot of people, definitely now. And at the same time, it has a complicated colonial history and can be something that sits in between you and a person, and even has a certain violence to it. But on the opposite side, again, it can also be the bridge to have a really intimate experience with the people you're working with. And in my work, I really try to find collaborative ways in which people that I work with around a certain topic can actually contribute and can be part of the process, can work with the images, add images to my work, paint on my images, and in many different ways really become part of the work itself.
And I think quite clearly, just speaking to you guys even now, it's a case of that it's not just your own stories that you want to tell. You want to tell the stories of the people that you meet, and it's that wonderful mix of figuring out what your likes are, dislikes are, and then figuring out what their likes and dislikes are as well. So as a question, do you prefer your own stories, or do you prefer actually giving a voice to somebody that might not have a very good voice in their story, if that makes sense?
Well, in my work, I feel like it's always my perception, it's always my view on something. So I'm trying to channel a story through which I'm often trying to reach the people that are at the other end of it.
Sure.
So I don't feel like I'm telling someone's story. I can't. I can only, create an image that translates my perception, my experience, my ideas. So my work, for me, although it's documentary in core, is much more translation of an idea, of a concept that I try to bring across through photographic images.
Speaking from the publisher perspective and the platform perspective, we have a core mission of championing underrepresented voices. So to answer your question, I think our entire mission is to tell the stories and champion the stories of other people.
Absolutely.
The world, especially in climate storytelling, is now so intersectional. And I think what we have tried to do is bring a human perspective and voice back into what can be quite abstract and unquantifiable. So yeah, we're massively passionate about building the next generation of talent.
Yeah.
Trying to get kit and cameras onto the front line, and actually that's something we've been doing with Nikon. We've run a pilot program where 12 NGOs around the world have received kit and training on how to actually create imagery and tell stories visually. And that bridging of the gap, bridging of the skills gap, as we call it, is a core part of our work.
I guess for me, each of my clients are so different, and the reason why they want to have a maternity session is because it's something that they want to remember forever and ever. And for many, it's a difficult journey, and so they really want it to be something that they can maybe have a little bit more control over. And for others, it's just because they want to feel just so empowered, or they want to kind of reconnect with themselves or their identity. So I would say it's definitely a partnership, but always making sure that this is their story and they never feel that I've kind of taken that away from them.
It's definitely a collaboration, isn't it? Like the whole process between yourself as the artist, if you like that term or not, and your subject. And I particularly agreed, Sam, with what you're saying about like particularly climate change, like the film I made, Dare to Hope, which is one of the reasons why I'm here today. We wanted to kind of take the micro and the macro and kind of just talk about the issue as a whole, but also the emotional aspects of it. And I think that's how you kind of get to people, is the emotional stuff. They kind of know the stories, they know the facts, but it's actually showing people like what actually will mean climate change in the future.
So obviously there's more images and video out there than ever before, and media is consumed in a completely different way now than it used to be from previous. So do you think that it's easier or more difficult to get that message out there?
I think it's kind of a mixed bag. It's between the saturation of so much content on social media and broadcasting as well, to the sort of individual being able to post on social media and it blow up and go viral and ultimately hopefully affect policy and change people's mind about a certain subject, like really shining the light on something that hadn't been seen before.
We've definitely seen a massive shift from maybe a more traditional kind of showing an audience what's there and giving them a new experience, or a kind of reportage style of documentary making or photography, and now it's much more authentic and kind of real, and actually trying to create that dialogue and conversation, through showing the truth rather than creating this pretty picture.
In my practice, the big question is always, can you really reach people and can you really make a difference?
Sure.
And it's really good to be optimistic about that, but at the same time difficult to, on your own as a photographer, feel like you're really making an infrastructural change. On one hand, you're dealing with an oversaturated audience also in terms of climate change and topics that are heavy and a bit gloomy. And on the other hand, we're dealing with a much more visually literate audience. So you have to find smart visual languages to kind of trick people into thinking and talking about subjects that might be difficult or sensitive. And I think bringing photography to a place of experiencing is therefore really important. And that's what I also try to do in my work, where you go from the photographic medium to creating an experience and helping people really understand a story through experience, and then hoping you'll reach that shift in perception of looking at genetic conditions, for example.
I'd love to get your guys' thoughts on this, because something we're discussing a lot is, do we want to lead our audiences on a journey and curate those journeys ourselves, right? Or do we want to let algorithms do it? And do we want to let data do it? And it's a really interesting debate, because actually what we want people to do is break out of their own echo chamber and, you know, find new content and watch new stories that they may not actually experience. And if we just let them get recommended content by an algorithm or something like that, then are we actually achieving, you know, our goal of getting people to kind of, you know, expand their horizons or shift their perspectives? It's a really interesting debate, and we haven't quite stumbled on the answer, but we'd love to get your photography minds on that.
That's super interesting. For me, I think it's any power you can take away from the robots, the better. I think stories should be human, and
That's a
you know,
great quote.
You should really, you should really run with that. Personally, I think handpick stories for everyone, or even just groups of people would be my opinion on that.
I try to not keep up with algorithms because it takes away from the people that have given me permission to share their images. They're proud of them and I'm proud of them, and I try not to spend too much time worrying about how far it's reached and how many likes or if it goes viral, but because I love it. And if it does, and that does happen, then that's great, because people appreciate that it's a beautiful image, and for the person in the photograph, they're like, oh my gosh, all these people have like seen, like, this is me, and I'm so proud of this moment and this baby that I'm carrying, and this is part of my journey. Often I get a lot of people say that they don't want their images shared and they want to keep that private, and I respect that and I love that, and it does give me a moment to kind of step back from social media a little bit and just appreciate and enjoy that journey between myself and the client, and that's really special.
What I'd love to know is, what do you do to ensure that what you're capturing, whether it's through stills or whether it's through video, isn't just documenting, you're also ensuring that you really get that impact in that media as well? So what is it that you do to that?
I think for me, it's both in my personal and professional life, is having this mantra of curiosity rather than judgment, and like really getting into grips of like the guts of the story, and documenting like what it means rather than what it is, and the why rather than the how, is something that is really, really important to me.
I guess what I'm most proud of is when a client wants to include their identity and their culture in their images. I think that's really special, and I think it takes a lot to do that, and especially for clients that I have that have come from, you know, different countries, and they've had to kind of fit in. That's how they describe it when they come here, and they dress down, and they don't wear their cultural clothing. And then when they come into the studio and they bring these incredible garments from Ghana and Nigeria, and they're like, this is what I want to wear. And I'm like, I'm so proud of you for doing that. And that for me is beautiful. And I guess because in some ways I'm on my own kind of journey with identity and figuring out my own culture. So that is something that I haven't kind of made into a thing, but it's always something that when I do experience that with a client, I feel happy that they're empowered and I feel empowered, and we get to do that together.
We often have this debate at Waterbear that, you know, is just creating that warm fuzzy feeling in an audience enough, right? And actually we've settled on the fact that yes, it is, right? Literally, you know, if a few people really emotionally connect with this piece of art and it changes them in whatever way that they change, that's a fantastic result. That being said, we often also really want to try and identify the specific impact that we want to create with the project. You know, in the spring we released a film called Matar, which is actually docu-fiction. So we were messing with this idea of it's based on real life, but it was scripted with a complete intentionality of showing the story of what life was like for a migrant in the UK. So that intentionality of a project to actually affect a change that you've set out from day one to actually script and create and curate to get that audience to do one thing, I think is a very powerful but very difficult, I hasten to add, thing to do.
Yeah, I believe very much in layering and the mix of mixed media, video, stills, painting, installation, all of that. But I think sometimes the magic of photography can still be to encapsulate an entire story in one still, in one photograph.
Yeah.
And in case of the Island of the Colorblind, the work I did on the Micronesian islands, Pingalap and Pohnpei, the image that encapsulates the series is this image of a boat in front of this bubblegum pink trees, which was a metaphor for inviting people into the diversity of vision and letting go of this conditioning of color and the world as a really colorful place. And at the same time, this image, which is about color diversity and open-mindedness, is also literally, for me, bringing me back to the entire idea of the refugee crisis, migration crisis, environmental migration. So at the same time, that image for me also translates all of those layers and people setting off for a better future, not being welcomed into the new world where they will possibly arrive. Yeah, and I think this is still one of the really urgent matters. I think not just UK, but the entire Western world.
Sort of what we try to do with There's Hope as well is sort of give people a signifier to say this will happen, it is going to happen. You know, the 1.5 degree target set by governments around the world. Antarctica has already experienced 3 degrees, so it's, and they effectively are the AC of our whole planet. So these things are happening, but yeah, it's getting that into the right eyes and ears, I suppose.
The next question I want to ask you guys is, what does success look like? Let's say, you know, you've had something that message has really landed, something has really worked. Is it the smaller wins? Is it the personal, someone coming up to you and you're like, yeah, I saw that, I love that? Or is it the bigger, the wider message? What's success like for all of you?
If I change one mind, I'll be happy.
Yeah.
And that, you know, that's what success is for me. And that I keep being able to create these stories and giving people a voice.
Sometimes they cry, I cry, and they're like, this is exactly what I wanted this to be. This might be finally their very first baby, or their last baby, or a baby in between babies. So sometimes my wins are photography and sometimes they're midwifery related, and there's nothing more wonderful than hearing back from somebody that not only chose me to photograph them but says thank you, because I'm not sure I would have got round the issues I was struggling with in the care that I was receiving had we not spoken, and that, I get emotional about it. That is what I miss about being a midwife. It's helping somebody do that, and if I can do that for one person, then that's huge, because having a baby is life-changing, and I feel like they should be able to be a part of that and also look incredible. So yeah.
It's such an extension though of your passion for midwifery, I think, that in these images. I mean, they're stunning. I think the success question for me is a challenging one. We spend a lot of our waking hours debating it. Impact is where we're trying to land on that, and how you define that in media is really difficult. Sam, I think I completely agree with you. I was having an awesome conversation about how sometimes you just want to make a film for one person, and if that one person can change a policy, then it doesn't matter about clicks and impressions and media value and ROI and all these kind of terms that get thrown around so much in our world. It's actually much more about, you know, the plan and what you're setting out to achieve with the project. And I think, you know, just making sure you define that at the beginning, you can really define success in any way you want.
Yeah, I think success in terms of impact is difficult to define or put your finger on. You can feel it in the small things, in the one-on-one, in the personal connection you have with the people you work with that extends for a lifetime. And at the same time, what I really love is to be surprised by the story, by the people, for them to spin it around. So in a lot of my work, people contribute in a way that I hadn't preconceived, which I love, because then it shakes me and it shakes the story up, and it becomes a much more honest and empathic exchange.
So if you can just talk to me about the technicality of this shot, because this is an infrared shot, so it's not with a standard camera out the box, right?
Well, it's still a Nikon camera. I have to admit, it's still a Nikon camera, but yeah, it's a converted camera, which was part of my visual strategy to envision the world differently, but also for myself to lose control over color while shooting this project. So I had a camera body converted and only started using it once I set foot on the island. So I had no clue how the images would turn out. But in this case, it's about, let's say, the loss of color or the win of opening up to all the possibilities that there are if we're not restricted by normalized ideas and conditioned vision.
I find it so interesting that you turn up to these places without touching the camera before. Do you mind explaining that to me a little bit?
Well, I think I'm someone who, that's on a personal level. We can talk about that later. But I have a lot of kind of mind control somehow over myself, over my body. And in photography, I'd love to lose that control, right? I don't want, like, when you're a photographer, you've been working for many years, you develop a certain visual language, a style. I can preconceive my images. You also start repeating images. You make images again because they're part of your story. They're part of how you see things. But I think the magic remains in when you are surprised by something you create. And that's why I love co-creating. That's why I love collaborating. And I also think that's just necessary in terms of exchange. But in this case, for example, the Island of the Colorblind, it allowed me to work with the medium differently, which is something I could not do if the story wouldn't allow me. I don't just want to use a visual trick to create something colorful. It needs to be the core essence of the story I want to tell and bring across. And for that, it was really important for me to not control the process of color, but to lose control over that process.
So as a final question, if there was somebody out there that wanted to use photography or video to start telling their story and start getting their message out there, and as we talked about, giving a voice to somebody that doesn't have a very big voice, what would that piece of advice be? What advice would you give them to start on that journey?
I mean, I always start by looking at inspiration. So similar stories, similar videos, photography, art, and then I start from there, from what already has been achieved, and I try and tackle things in my own way and like putting my own perspective on things. So seeing what's out there in the world, not letting that, constrain me too much, but like seeing already what's there and how I can do it differently, I suppose.
Sure.
My advice would be to try a little bit of everything. I think it's really hard when you get started and you don't know what to do. And while I think it's incredible looking at and getting inspiration, and I know I felt very much kind of overwhelmed by everything that I saw, and I didn't know what to do, and that made me maybe not try so much to kind of find out what it was that I wanted. So I tried a bit of everything, and there were some things where I realized, yeah, maybe not that. And there were some things that I thought I could do this. And an actual fact, like when I got started in photography, I didn't think about doing maternity at all. It was a workshop that I attended, and I realized, why am I not using what I was so passionate about to do with my photography? And I think when people want to move into photography or any kind of creative discipline like videography, it's because we're maybe trying to get away from something else and we want to be expressive, but there can also be ways that you can actually be inspired by your past history or past careers or life experiences that can influence your photography. So think about also what you're passionate about and what you like or what you want to change. Sometimes that can spark off ideas and you might find yourself down a path that you didn't expect to go down. So definitely go on a exploration kind of journey and see where that takes you, because
Sure.
I think then the possibilities can be endless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. I think it links, my advice, I guess, is linked to our mission as a company and Waterbear. We really encourage the next generation of talent that is coming through, who are incredible, to do kind of two or three things. One is to start really with impact and set that intention at the beginning of the project. I see so many incredible young creatives and storytellers and artists kind of with awesome concepts, but lacking a kind of real anchor for why they're doing it, apart from just creating great art, which is of course fine. But I think speaking from the perspective of our impact first approach, I really encourage people to think about setting that impact intention.
Yeah.
And the second kind of linked side of that coin is the collaboration piece. We're really building this sense of community, and I think often, rightly so, people can feel very, this is my work, and feel very protective of it. And I'm really encouraging the the hundreds of storytellers that we work with as a network to relax that a little bit and really invite people into their creative process and enable that cooperation and collaboration, because I think that co-creation piece, which we've touched on, really elevates work to a new place. But really starting with impact is our core advice as Waterberg.
Yeah, I think the journey possibly starts with digging deep for what really touches you and why. What's your story? Why do you want to tell it? Why are you the right person to tell that story? And then how are you going to tell it with significance? And at the same time, not being intimidated by that there's a lot of storytellers out there, but actually seeing that also as an opportunity to collaborate. I think it's time to let go of this idea of a photographer or a videographer having to do things all by themselves. There's many ways to collaborate, and there's a lot of strength and power to that. And multiple minds just have more creativity than one mind. And at the same time, your story is worth telling. We're all the same, but we're also all unique, and we do have our own experiences and our own viewpoint that are worth sharing.
Sure. Well, thank you all so much. We've gone through some amazing discussions there, some amazing stories, and I can only thank you so much. Thank you to those of you watching at home as well. If you've enjoyed this episode of Nikon Sessions, please do make sure you subscribe to the Nikon Europe YouTube channel so that you can keep up to date with all the new Nikon Sessions episodes. Thank you very much.